Melissa is the environmental education specialist at Baylor University's Center for, I have to write, Center for Reservoir and Aquatic Systems Research. It's kind of a mouthful. So she connects science and research to general audiences. The groundwater outreach community kind of adopted her a couple years ago when she did a training for a few groundwater outreach people. So she's unofficially one of us now, and we're happy to have her here talking education. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good to go.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. I am going to talk about building effective education programs, and I really loved hearing what Janet had to say about PR. There is some overlap, of course, between education and outreach and PR, although they're different worlds. First of all, the number of the day is 6.27. And I know you guys, I can't ask you what you think that number is, but it's the amount of rain I had at my house overnight in my Coco Ross rain gauge. So it's kind of sad maybe to be such a precipitation happy person, but I'm sure very many of you also are the same. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Center for Reservoir and Aquatic Systems Research, or CRASR, as we affectionately call it. Scientists and their acronyms. What are you going to do? We sit on the Baylor campus in Waco, Texas, and we are across the road from the mighty Brazos River, and we are on the banks of a heavily urbanized watershed, which is Waco Creek. So we're very cognizant of water in both our research and our education and outreach. I want to tell you a little bit about me. I am a water educator. That's what I do. But I didn't start out as a water educator. So if you are one of those groundwater conservation districts that has one employee and you find yourself wearing many hats like Julia was talking about, I can feel you. And you maybe this water education isn't where you thought that you would be going in your life. Um, but but I enjoy what I do, and I don't only do groundwater education. We do a lot of different educational programs. But I'm really fortunate because here at Baylor, we have a strong hydrogeology group in our geoscience department. That's headed up by Dr. Joe Yelderman. Some of you probably know Dr. Yelderman. And so these folks always help me with groundwater education. So scientists become a reluctant water educator now, wholeheartedly in the water education world is who I am. So who are you? We have a poll to launch, and I don't know how this is going to work if I can see the results of the poll, but I think our organizers opening it.
You can't see the poll right now, but you will be able to see when they post the results. So
Awesome.
we've got that.
So who are you? Manager, board member, technical staff, educator, outreach, other, and maybe you wear all of those hats, and I don't think you're allowed to check. I don't think you're allowed to select multiple ones. Sorry. All right. I think I am sharing my screen again, but I don't see the poll results.
It should be showing up now, but so it is showing that 36% chose manager,
Okay.
24% were technical staff, and then 18% board member, 12% educator outreach, and 9% other. So we've got mostly managers and technical folks here.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's really helpful for me to know because I'm speaking to you as an educator, an outreach person, and you may not have that staff working for you, right? So you may serve that role too. That may explain some of the numbers we're getting. But also, I think it's good because it means I'm not just preaching to the choir. Maybe I'm trying to get some people to join this tribe of educator and outreach folks that we are who are on this. So I'm going to highlight just a couple of the programs that CRASR does. This isn't all of them. We do after school girls science clubs. We've done these for many years in the Waco community, and they meet once a week during the school year, and they're run by Baylor STEM majors. They don't just do water education in those clubs, but because we're an aquatic research center, they do a lot of water education. These are mostly for middle school girls. We do a lot of citizen science water quality monitoring. So we are a partner with Texas Stream Team at Meadow Center for Water and the Environment. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. And the big idea with citizen science water quality monitoring is that you don't have to be an expert to get involved in monitoring water, right? And so we monitor sites on the Baylor campus and around Waco. And some of the sites can sometimes be low flow springs, small springs we have around. So there definitely are some groundwater connections with that water quality monitoring effort. We also do a lot of educator workshops, so teaching teachers, and these can be teachers that are in classrooms. These can be teachers that teach outside of classrooms primarily, so informal science educators. Sometimes we do them on very specific topics that our researchers may have funded projects on, and other times they're just broad education, invite all the elementary teachers to do some water education topics. We, about 3 years ago, we started something called the Baylor Aquatic Science Series, and we do a talk once a month for the K through 8th grades. One of our researchers takes a talk each month, and they pick a grade band to do that talk on. And they talk about their research and their journey as a scientist. These are very short talks and very kid friendly, and that allows them to reach classrooms from coast to coast without leaving their labs, which they really like, right? So this is a typical semester. This was our first semester. We might reach over 500 students in the semester. And our partner in that is NEPRIS, which is based here in Texas, and they connect industry to classroom. In this case, the industry is the water industry or aquatic science. But they've been a great partner for us, and that's been a great ongoing effort. It's just a few of the things we do, not all of them. I just wanted to highlight a few types. So I said maybe I was thinking maybe I'd be preaching to the choir, but maybe I'm not. The question becomes why education and outreach? And you're here at this session, so hopefully that's something that you are interested in. But it is worth stopping and considering, I think, for just a moment. One reason I think groundwater education and outreach is so important is when you guys look at this figure, you immediately know what this is, right? But I think you would probably agree with me that many of the audiences that you might work with around the state or in your own districts wouldn't necessarily recognize this figure. Now, I know in some parts of the state, they're very, people might really know, if you're in the Edwards Aquifer area. But in other parts of the state, I think like you could show people a map of river basins and they probably would know what you're looking at pretty quickly, but you show them a map of aquifers and maybe not so much. But groundwater is such a big part of the water story in Texas that people do need to understand this more. Another reason is I am not a groundwater expert, not a hydrogeologist by any stretch of the imagination. But when we look at studies like this one from the Water Development Board, I can see that at the end of this time period they were looking at, there's more red on the map than blue. And that's not a good thing because that's water level change in feet. And of course, a lot of drawdowns happened before that period of 1995 where they're starting here. So groundwater is something people often don't know a lot about, and it's a resource like the rest of our aquatic resources that that needs conservation and protection. So those two things, I think, make a strong argument why some part of what you do has to be focused on education and outreach. However, we all have limited resources, right? I have limited resources, you guys have limited resources. So how do we allocate our resources? Not just this money, but also time and people. Because you might have to split among other things like operations and regional planning and science and research. And how do you allocate that? So that's my question to you. That's the next question I have. What's the next poll? What's the top priority of those that were listed for your groundwater conservation district? And it may be something else that wasn't listed there, but these are the choices we're going to work with and see if you guys are still awake and what you think. Are we ready to close the poll and share results? So I don't know why I'm still not
People
seeing the
can't see
results.
them?
Yeah, I
Okay,
don't
well,
know what
they're
I'm probably doing something wrong, but if you just tell me what it is, that's helpful.
it's okay. So the highest was 41% said conservation. After
Awesome.
that, we had 22% operations, 19% science and research, 15% education and outreach, and then 4% with regional planning.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. I was involved in regional planning when I worked for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department early in my career, and I didn't know how much of a have a focus that is for resources for groundwater conservation districts. So that's good to hear. Conservation, that's great, right? Like that should be a top priority. But I'm glad education and outreach is in there too. We all have to make decisions, right? We have to make decisions about how to allocate our resources. So um, I think kind of like the public relations talk we heard previously, I'm going to say that education and outreach can really help you do your job, the other things that you have to do as districts. It can help you get to know your stakeholders and their concerns. And it can help you address common misconceptions about groundwater conservation districts. So a lot of it is that relationship building that we were hearing about earlier, working with those audiences and building relationship. And most importantly, it can help people see themselves as part of a sustainable groundwater future. So where do you start? Maybe you're at the beginning, maybe you're revamping what you do. A lot of people say start at the beginning, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. I say that you should start with the end in mind. And that's true whether you are starting from scratch, if you're updating what you're currently doing, or you're just brainstorming what might be new to come. Now I'm at Baylor, so a proverb is always good. And Proverbs says it like this: where there is no vision, the people perish. So if you don't know where you want to end up with your education and outreach, if you don't know where you want to go, you're probably going to have a hard time getting there. In the words of groundwater vocabulary, which I took a little time to educate myself a little bit with materials Julia shared with me, you have this thing called desired future condition, a quantifiable condition of an aquifer at a specified future time, and you use a number with that, right? You have some numerical criteria or something, a goal that you can measure yourself against. Well, my question would be, do you have a desired future condition in mind for education in your groundwater conservation district? And maybe if you don't, you should, so that you know when you get there, you have some measurable thing. How would you start thinking about that? Well, where I would start is and you could work with your staff or stakeholders in your district if you don't have a very large staff, thinking about what is the most important thing that you think everyone should understand about groundwater, everyone in your district, everyone. And if we were in person, we would do this exercise. We would have a bunch of sticky notes and we would brainstorm in groups and we would stick them up on the wall and we would figure out what is the thing that we think people should know. And that can help us set our goal. And then we say, okay, this is the thing we think, that people should know, and how are we going to get there? So one way we get there is thinking about things like audiences, and partners and people that can help us. So when it comes to thinking about audiences, who is your audience? You probably have several different audiences you might work with in an education and outreach mode, and they'll have different needs. And so again, talking about that limited resources, I think it's really important to prioritize your audiences and think about, if I have this desired future condition, which of the audiences that I might work with would get me there the most if I was able to effectively reach them. So I think oftentimes, and I know I'm guilty of this, we work with the audience that is easiest for us to access, or it's the most fun for us to work with, or we really like them and we're really interested in them. But that might not be the audience that's going to get you to where you want to go. So you got to consider that. One of the main audiences, I think the first thing a lot of people think about when they think about education and outreach is school children, but there's several different groups of school children you might engage. If you are working with K through 12 schools, there's a couple of needs to keep in mind. Teachers and administrators are super busy, of course, now more than ever. And so they need the easy button. You need to make it really easy for them to say yes to you and what you want to do. One way to help with that is to know your standards. You may not be an educational expert. You know, I certainly am not, but I can search the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills online when I want to do something with K through 12 audiences. And I'm like, well, do they even, like, is the word groundwater even in the TEKS? Like, where does it connect? What grade level? And if you figure that out, it's going to help you a lot in getting to work with K through 12 schools. Homeschool groups, I don't work with them a lot, but I have some, and I have colleagues who have really regular ongoing projects with homeschool groups. The thing to be aware of there is that you will need to accommodate multiple grade levels. They don't usually just bring you one grade level. At-home learners, well, this is a group that like suddenly became super important about the middle of March, right? Because everybody who was in school was now learning at home. So I had to figure out, and most of my colleagues did too, what of the education and outreach that we do can we do online for these at-home learners? And this is going to continue to be, you know, an important group for some time into the future. And some of what we learn now we can take to help us build that audience even after COVID. Early childhood education. Well, I resisted working with this group for a long time because I was like, you know, this is pre-K. So this isn't K through 12, this is pre-K. And I have kids, I love babies, but I was like, I really, you know, I just don't know how to do this with water education. But luckily, there's some good resources, and I'll show you some later for working with this age group. And some of their teachers may be really hungry for what you have to offer. So I know some groundwater educators that are doing great work in the early childhood education realm. What about college students going to the other end above the 12? Do you have internship opportunities you can offer? The earlier speaker was talking about that too. Here at Baylor, a lot of our students, when they get to their senior year of college, the environmental science students, they have to do an internship. If you have internship opportunities you can offer, a lot of them are interested in practical experiences in the water sector. So I'd love to hear from you if you have something you could offer Baylor students, or if you want to reach out to a college or university near you. I'm sure that they have similar needs, and that's a group you could work with. Adults, well, I already mentioned teachers. They need quality professional development opportunities, and one way that you can get to do that is by becoming a continuing professional education or CPE provider. It's a fairly simple process application with the state of Texas. If you don't want to do it, you can probably work with somebody in your area who can grant those hours on your behalf. So there's no doubt organizations, and we'll mention a few when we're talking about partnerships, that could do that for you if that's a road that you don't want to go down. But it's useful to be able to give those teachers that certificate with somebody's CPE number on it. Empty nesters and retirees, they're often looking for lifelong learning opportunities and also volunteer opportunities so they can help you with what you're trying to do. Homeowners and small property owners, I'm sure many of you work with homeowners associations and other groups like that, especially in your conservation work. Agricultural producers, I know is a big part of the groundwater story in a lot of Texas. So this may be a group that you want to engage in education and outreach programs, not just when you have a project that you want to send a specific message about, but just in general, and building that relationship. And then of course, business and industry. Families are another group that aren't just kids or just adults, right? It's a mixed age group, multi-generational group. And I work with families some, and they're usually looking for something fun and relaxing, right? So we say education, but it's education light. They're not in school, they're not at work, and they want to do something fun. And this was true before COVID, and it's still true now. The thing you have to think about if you're working with families is, if your activity is good for, say, a 10-year-old, somebody like that, what's their toddler sibling going to be doing, and can grandma participate? And I'll give you a specific example. We do a once a month Meet the Scientist event at the MAYBORN Museum, or at least we were until mid-March. And we're getting ready to start up in about 10 days. So hopefully my next event doesn't look like this one. We've got a lot of control measures in place, but When we first started doing this, I thought, well, we're doing water quality testing. We've made it pretty obvious what we're doing. People know who they should bring and what this is going to be like. But no, I mean, we had kids bring in like 2-year-olds to do the water quality testing. And then we had older adults with mobility issues that really couldn't walk down the riverbank to get the sample. So we had to rethink what we were doing so that we could really engage families. And we did that successfully. Okay, poll number 3. What audience do you wish your GCD did a better job of reaching in terms of education and outreach? All right. Have people had time to respond?
All right, our results are 40% said adults,
Ooh,
followed by,
nice.
these are really even percentages. 30% said family groups, 20% said school children, and the remaining 10% said college students. So
Yeah.
nobody selected early childhood learners.
Nobody selected early childhood. Well, I'm not surprised, unfortunately. I was very reluctant to go with that one too. 40% adults, that's really cool. So I think, thinking about ways you can engage those adults. I know Julia in her previous life did some really cool things for adult learners or adults, right, to engage adult audiences. Because their needs are different and what they want to do is different. And family groups too. That's great to hear that you want to do that. I think thinking about, the types of offerings you can have that engage family groups is really good. Great. Thanks you guys. So next I'm going to talk about the typical types of presentations and programs that GCDs or other water educators might tend to do. We give classroom presentations, of course, that's pretty straightforward. We could do field trips. Those could be on site to your site if you have a place that's amenable to that. Some of you do and some of you don't. It could be to other sites in your district. Is there a place in the district that's really important to the groundwater story of your district where that people could see something or do something or engage in something? So on site, off site. You can do lunch and learns or speaker series for adults. This is another fun thing. I know some organizations I'm involved with during COVID, their lunch and learn series, which have gone online, which may have been in person before, have really exploded in popularity. Booths at community events, like you see in that picture there, that's a really common one. And a lot of GCDs, a lot of water education um, folks do water festivals, and these are really popular too. And generally, a way that you'll have some stations or activities set up. They're often geared towards um, school children, but they can also be geared towards communities. You can do them for a community event. But we've put one together at Baylor fairly recently, which we haven't gotten to run yet because of COVID. But we thought about, what were kind of the 5 things we would like to have activities for people to engage in and understand more. So that's kind of a fun thing to do. What you need to think about is for each of those situations, what's engaging. It's different for each situation, right? Like in a classroom, you can have really a lesson plan, like with a really kind of formal sequence. A community event, it might be come and go. One thing I see not just water educators, but just educators in general, when I go to booths at places, do is they think I have this message I want to give people, so I'm going to make this Word document and print out this piece of paper, and people are going to pick it up when they walk by my booth, and they'll pick it up and they'll put it in the bag, the plastic bag that they got at the very first guy, and along with all the other stuff, right? And then what happens to that at the end of the day? And I'm not saying you can't have pieces of paper, bookmarks or whatever you want to do, but I'm saying you need a hook to get people to stop and engage with you. And I'm going to give you an example of a hook I use. It's just one. I have a bunch of them, but they can be cheap, they can be easy. But while people are there, you can talk to them about whatever you want. This is one I print out. It's called Walk on Water Challenge. It's not a groundwater example, but I print it out on a large piece of paper and laminate it. And then I just have a tub of water or a dish pan of water and some paper clips there. The challenge is for people to try to see how many paper clips they can float on the surface of the water using surface tension. And people get really into this. They get really competitive. I mean, you almost have to kick them out of your booth sometimes. But while they're there, you can talk to them about whatever else. You can ask questions because they're just playing. It doesn't take all of their attention. So whatever that hook might be for you doesn't have to be expensive, doesn't have to be complicated, but you just want to get people to engage with you. So talking about presentation types, Another poll, what's the most common type that your GCD does? Classroom, field trips, community events, or tables, which would be tables or booths, or water festivals, or series for adults? What you got for me?
Okay, your results are 45% said classroom presentations,
Yeah.
27% community event tables or booths, then 18% lunch and learn speaker series for adults, and then 5% each said field trips and water festivals.
Oh, so that's less on the field trips and water festivals. See, I love this because I'm getting to find out what you guys do too, and that's less on the field trips and water festivals than I would have thought, especially the field trip side. And I know there are some GCDs who have some pretty successful water festivals, but a lot of classroom outreach, and that's a really good thing. That means you're really getting in there with those learners in your community. So let's talk about partnerships and opportunities for partnerships for a moment. And this is not going to be an all-inclusive list. It's really just going to be a way to approach thinking about this and a few examples of some partners that maybe you haven't considered. The thing to think about is who are the people and organizations that can help you? Because we all, as we said before, you might be a one-man show. I mean, I am here at Crasser. I have researchers, but for education and outreach, I'm the only one doing it, and there's no way I could do anything that I do without partnerships. So those folks are really important to build those relationships are with and when thinking strategically about partnerships, you want to consider the messaging and the audiences you're trying to reach, who would have similar messaging to you and who would work with the audience that you want to reach. So for instance, if agriculture is a big part of the groundwater story where you are, and I imagine it probably is for a lot of you, well, there's AgriLife extension agents in every county. And I know some of you work very successfully with your AgriLife extension agents on education and outreach. But if you aren't working with them and that's, a need that you have, I would encourage you to reach out reach out to them. What about your regional education service centers? So these guys are the ESCs, are sort of the arm of Texas Education Agency in Texas. And if you want to reach teachers or you want to reach K through 12 learners, they can be a really big help to you. They can also give CPE hours for professional development you're doing if you work with them closely. Do you know what region you're in? I'm in region 12. You should know what region you're in. And not only should you know what region you're in, you should know the science specialist in your region. You should know them by name. You should know their email. You should be able to call on them for things and them to call on you. And I know some of you, there's some groundwater educators that I hope are in the audience now that have told me they've recently started working with ESCs, and it can be a really great relationship. So I encourage you to consider cultivating that if you aren't already. What about Texas Master Naturalists? There's chapters of those guys all over the state too. Has your groundwater conservation district made a presentation to them? They would be really interested in what you have to say. They are always looking for monthly speakers and trainers, so I'd consider doing it, periodically, maybe every couple years, even if you've done it before. Also, within the Master Naturalists, they have an endorsement, a special endorsement that they can get that's called Texas Water Specialist. That's through Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Most chapters have some water specialists in them. Our local chapter, which is Heart of Texas, has water specialists, and those are folks I reach out to all the time to help me with educational programming. So they can be a really great, and if you don't have a chapter like in the county you're in, there, I would just go to the one that's closest to you because they are willing to travel some distance to help with things. What about community nonprofits and local business? Sometimes the people who are doing things in your community might not be who it would make them like you would automatically think would be doing it. So I'll give you an example. In Waco, the only group that I know that is doing rainwater harvesting classes regularly, people come in and they make a rain barrel and they leave with a functioning rain barrel, is Keep Waco Beautiful. And I think of the Keep Whatever Beautiful organizations as, their beautification projects. They're just like, they're about picking up trash and making sure like people's lawns look nice. Maybe they do some litter pickup on the river and they would be connected to water that way. But no, in our community, they're actually doing rainwater harvesting. So there may be some nonprofits that you could work with that aren't the most obvious partners. Informal science education providers. So every little town in Texas, just about, or many of them, have libraries. It may be a small library, but they have libraries. And libraries, in case you didn't know it, aren't just for checking out books anymore. They're doing all kinds of things, and they're doing all kinds of programming. And they, along with museum and nature centers, are great places or great places to partner with for what you want to do. The Informal Science Education Association of Texas is the professional organization for our informal science education providers in Texas, and that's their website there. They're a great organization to get your staff to go to training and lunch and learns that they have if you're interested in that type of learning experience. So last poll, you guys are probably getting tired of them, but I like to know what you think too. Pick it. I want you to pick from these at least one partnership you'd like to see your GCD develop that is not a current partner.
All right, the responses are rolling in. We will display the results in just a minute.
Awesome. No hurry.
And
We're
I
doing
think
good.
if you click around your windows, you could see it, but I'm just going to tell you, we've got
I'm afraid of clicking anything, you know.
43% said Regional Education Service Center.
Nice.
26% said we should partner with all of these. 17% said AgriLife Extension, and 17 said local library or museum. And then 13% said Texas Master Naturalist Chapter.
So what that tells me, those responses is cool. I mean, the ESC was higher than the others, right? But it tells me that in this list, because I said that is not a current partner, that there's at least somebody you could think about developing a new partnership with. And that's how to keep your programs growing, I think, is to think about those new partnerships that you can cultivate. So very good. So I'm going to switch now to talking specifically about groundwater activities and curricula that I use when I do groundwater education. And these are not the only groundwater activities and curricula that there are. There's a lot of great stuff out there. You know, Water Development Board has stuff. You guys are probably developing this on your web page too. So there's all kinds. But these are some that I use. They happen to all be from Project WET, which is Water Education Today. Used to be called Water Education for Teachers, but they just recently rebranded to be called Water Education Today. And I use their curriculum and activity guide 2.0 that has about 65 activities in it. Not all of them are groundwater activities, but there's several that are. I use their brand new climate, water, and resilience. Well, they just came out with this year, so I have to say I haven't used it much, but we're starting to use it. So it's really looking at that overlap of climate science with water and how communities can prepare for the future. And then, even though no one said they wanted to work with early childhood educators, I have to plug Getting Little Feet Wet, which is their early childhood education guide. And I went to an advanced training on this at a Project WET conference last year, and I was pretty much sold, even though I haven't done a lot of early childhood stuff since then, but I was pretty much sold on how much fun and how easy it really could be. I was surprised at how they took some of the activities that we do with older students and adults regularly and really tailored them for the younger kids in a way that was really successful and engaging. We got to do it with some kids and see how they were doing. So that was great. So those are three curricula that I use from Project WET. How can you get those if you're interested in them? Well, in Texas, Project WET is not administered through one like state agency the way it is in some other places. It's through host institutions. And so if you go to the Project WET website, you can click on an interactive map there to find the host institution closest to you and the coordinator closest to you. They will be offering Project Wet workshops often. A lot of those have moved online currently. If they aren't, they can still work with you because there's an online training module that you can do working with your coordinator and still get the curriculum. And it's been pretty, I haven't done it, people say it's pretty good. You could also consider becoming a Project Wet host institution. I know at least one groundwater conservation district that is. So just check that out. So I'm going to talk about a couple specific um, Project Wet activities that are specific to groundwater. These aren't all of them, but I'm going to demo a couple of them or highlight and demo them. The first one is called Get the Groundwater Picture. And in this Project Wet activity, students, and this is for middle school, high school audiences, they identify the parts of a groundwater system, they compare movement of water through substrates, and they look at different types of land uses and potential for groundwater contamination. Now, how they do this, there's in every activity, there's usually a warm up and there's some different options, but how they do this is every student gets a strip of paper that's 12 inches long, and that represents a well that has been drilled through these different layers, and they create their well log for their well. And then they all, so you can kind of see on the picture there, it's labeled 1 through 12 on the left hand side, and then you can tape all those up on the wall together to kind of make the whole cross section of the aquifer, the area of study. And you're able to talk about things like permeable and impermeable layers, the water table where that's at, confined and unconfined aquifers, and there's a lot of other groundwater terminology in there. There's a lot of ways to hack this activity and do it like with bigger pieces of paper, and people do all kinds of things with it. But this is a really specific groundwater activity that I know has been popular with a lot of GCDs, educators. Another one is called Springing into Action. And in this, the students actively simulate the process of water infiltrating down gradient through soil layers, and then it hits an impermeable layer and it exits the ground at a spring. This works for elementary through high school, and they actually build a physical model of a spring system, like with a 2-liter bottle. So it's, again, a pretty popular one, I think. And then I'm going to talk last about From Soil to Supper, and I'm actually going to demo this one a little bit. This is from the new Climate, Water, and Resilience Guide. And so this focuses on soil moisture and how that connects to agriculture. But the whole body game that students do, where they simulate that they're different materials like gravel, sand, or clay, by how close they stand together, and then other students are water that are trying to get through that. That game connects the earth's surface to the soil, to groundwater. But I'm going to do just the warm up with you. So this is just the warm up to that activity. And the reason I want to do this with you is because I want to show you, how easy it can be. It doesn't have to be something super complicated. All you need for this warm up is a dry sponge, kitchen sponge, and some water. So a bowl or pan of water, which I have here too. So the first thing you do is you ask the students to feel the sponge. What does it feel like? It's dry, it's crunchy, it doesn't have any water. And then they're going to, and so you can spend some time on that. And then they're going to saturate the sponge with water. So this is I did the little cooking show and had this soaking a little bit beforehand, but this is the sponge saturated with water. And you hold it above your water without squeezing it. And you look at what's happening here. And there's water dripping out of the sponge. And you ask the students, well, what's causing the water to drip out of the sponge? And hopefully they'll answer gravity. And to that you can say, yes, this water that's dripping out of this sponge is called gravitational water or free water. And soil is like this sponge. Soil has air holes called pore spaces, and those can hold water. And that water that's held in soil is called soil moisture. And that's the water that's in the soil. If you get a lot of rain, like we did at my house last night, hopefully some of that ends up in the soil and soil moisture. Now, if the sponge represents the soil, what might this bowl or this container of water underneath represent? Where does the water that percolates through the soil, which is your sponge, go? And gravitational water that filters all the way through goes into the groundwater below. And so you can talk to them about this being a store of underground water. Of course, this is not a confined aquifer, but you can talk about percolation and recharge and go into that with them. The groundwater surface is called the water table, so you can talk about that too. And you can ask them what's happening to the water table as the water drips in. So you can make a mark on the side of the container if you want to see it actually rising, to see as this water is moving through the soil that the groundwater is rising, the water table is rising. When it stops dripping, which it will do if you hold it long enough, you can ask them if there's still water in it. And if they're not sure, you can have them squeeze it and some water will come out, right? So that water that remains in there, it's held between those spaces through cohesion and adhesion. So you can talk about those attractions of water molecules to each other and to soil too. And it stays in there until it's moved by plants, roots, or evaporation. So there's connections to groundwater with this activity for sure. There's also connections to agriculture and to climate. So it's a new one, but I think a fun one to use. And that was just the warm up. Physical models are a favorite of mine. They probably are of yours too. I have one here behind me that's brand new for our water festival. They don't have to be complicated like this one. If you have one of these, they cost about $900 to $1,000. With kids, there a lot of younger kids are very literal learners. So like I even put little models of people on the top of this thing. Now this isn't to scale, of course, but it helps them see when you're talking about groundwater, the groundwater is the water under your feet. And we're looking at this cross section. It helps them think about where they are in relation to that groundwater. And you can do a lot with this model. If you haven't used it before, there's great videos of the demos of this on the Texas Water Development Board's webpage of all of the different things you can do with this type of model. It doesn't have to be fancy like that though. On the slide there, you can see you can make a simple groundwater model. Students can make their own using things like a tub and gravel and soil and a pump, a hand squeezer for a pump. And I actually really like to let kids do that because it's more hands-on than just them doing a demo. And there's another one that has 3 pumps in it. You can find that online too. Pretty fun and easy to make. A relatively new one for me and our hydrogeology group here brought this person to campus to speak is this foldable aquifer project, which there's the website for it. It's really cool because you print it out and it's just a piece of paper, right? But then you fold it the way that it says to fold it and you can make different kinds of aquifers. The science that can be taught with these foldable aquifer projects is pretty high level stuff. It's college level stuff. But myself and some of the hydrogeology group have also used these successfully with younger kids because they can color these. And again, it's just another model, but it's a 3-dimensional thing you can just make out of paper. The last thing I'm going to say before I have just a few minutes for questions, if there are any, is that I am not really the groundwater education expert. Julia mentioned at the beginning that these guys have adopted me, which I'm thrilled about. But I would encourage you, if your groundwater conservation district is not already involved with the Groundwater Educational Outreach Collaborative, to join the collaborative. You can find them on Facebook. The address is there. You can email them at collaboratewater@gmail.com and they meet regularly. I don't get to go to all their meetings. I've been to a few of them and they're great. Get involved with them. They're doing what you need to be doing as groundwater educators. And that's really it. If I have time for questions, and if we have any, Julia, then I'll take them. I understand I'm standing between people in happy hour, so.
It's okay, there's a break too, so it's fine. Before we do dive into questions, so first of all, a reminder, be sure to type in any questions you have into the questions bar on your control panel. Before we dive into those, I do want to remind everyone about the happy hour. It is a virtual happy hour happening over Zoom. We'll be doing that at 4:30, about 15 minutes after we finish here. So go grab yourself a snack and a drink and meet us for that virtual happy hour. You'll find the link to that back at the homepage. So getting on with the first question. Have you done any virtual educational labs with middle school students where the schools have the lab materials and the students and they're virtually led by the educator?
I have not done that yet, but we're getting ready to start that in just a few weeks. So our Sci Girls science clubs that I talked about are happening again this fall. And some of them, the learners will be at home and the school will send the materials home, and our educators will, our STEM majors will lead the activity. Others, the students will still be at school during the after school space, but our students are still leading it virtually, because Baylor's back in classes. We're trying to keep our students as contained as we can. So I haven't done it yet. I'm getting ready to. So I don't have any real tips to share on it yet.
Not yet. It's a new world for everyone out there. Oh, and another question came in from the same person that asked that. Alan Day from Brazos Valley GCD wants to talk to you about that. So
Okay, great.
he'll come hunt
I
you
think you know
down.
how to get a hold of me. So I didn't, yeah, there's my email right there. So please, yeah, if I don't make it to the happy hour, because I can't drink on the Baylor campus, so I have to go all the way home, before I could join the happy hour. But if I don't make it, you have my email there. So
Okay, we'll connect you guys for sure. What is a good way to start school presentations? How to make that first contact? Because that's kind of scary for someone outside of the education realm.
So do you think that question means, it doesn't mean to start the actual presentation, it means to reach out to the school?
Yes, yes, I think
Okay.
that's what.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I would recommend, like I said, start with the Education Service Center and see if they know specific needs, because they're the ones that are going to know what campuses are looking for things. Because like where we are, sometimes it's the small rural schools that really need something and the bigger schools don't. They have their own thing, you know what I mean? But they know that, they know all of those. So that would be my, unless you have an in, like your sister-in-law is a teacher at a school, and that happens a lot of times in small communities where you have an in, you know, your neighbor or your teacher, and that's a friendly place to start. But if you don't have that, I would recommend trying the science specialist at your ESC.
Great, thanks. And I think this is a really good question to close everything out. If you had to pick one thing, if someone says, I have one person and I'm going to devote a little bit of time, what would you have them do? What is the one educational thing that they should try to start up?
So, okay. So I think it is a good question. I think it's a really hard question because I think I think the answer to that question depends on assessing all of those questions that I was talking about. Like, what is your desired future condition? Who is the audience that can get you there, right? So like if I said, oh, it's, you should definitely do family nature clubs. You only have one person and they can only do one type of thing. You should do family nature. Well, that might be the thing that's the best for one GCD where they are with their audience and who they're trying to reach. But for another, it might not be. So I know I'm really weaseling out of that question. But I really feel like it's I really feel like it's specific, like I know you have some commonalities as groundwater conservation districts and the things you need to educate about. But if it was one topic, I'm thinking for GCDs, it's got to be conservation, right? Like that's got to be where we're a big focus. And sounded like a lot of folks were doing that.
Yeah,
So I
that's
don't know
something
that.
to start. I think that speaks to, I mean, what's great about GCDs is that they are all customized to the spaces and the people that they serve. So
Right.
I think it's actually a perfect question. And unfortunately, so we don't have one size fits all answer, but your presentation gives the mechanisms for figuring out what that perfect answer is. So thank you so much for joining us, Melissa. We'll let you skedaddle on home so you can join us for happy hour.